Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Kevin Hrusovsky, Chairman and CEO and President of Nasdaq-listed Quanterix and founder of Powering Precision Health, to discuss how investors should approach biotech investments in today's landscape. Kevin, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks a lot, Jill.
And Kevin, a silver lining that has emerged from COVID-19 is the ability for companies to pivot and find innovative solutions. What are some of the trends that you're watching in the biotech space?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think the regulatory barriers have come down significantly in this landscape. The FDA is fighting very hard to try to get new tests approved that are needed because there's still a lot of problems with the testing. We also feel overall diagnostics has significantly increased its valuation because it's become so paramount to so many dimensions of trying to get policy in place and the economy back that I think the diagnostic, being able to see particularly asymptomatics, is becoming a pretty big area of focus. I also think that the infectious disease market is going to be a large market for the next 10 years. And so I think there's a lot more opportunity to significantly advance infectious disease platforms. So I think that, there's been a lot of transformation. I think the way companies run too is virtual. And what's the definition of the boundaries of a company, I think, have changed significantly with Zoom and the way we interact. So as a result, I almost think it's easier to reach into the organizations of who you're selling to. In the case of biotechs, many times there's a lot of collaborations needed to pull off a significant disruption. And I think collaborations are actually easier today, I think, in many ways than it was prior to the pandemic, just because of Zoom.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly easier to get everyone in the room and not have to manage different schedules. And I also want to add on what you're saying about Zoom. Of course, the way that we're doing our content here today, I also feel like it levels the playing field when everybody is virtual versus having a few people in the room and other people virtual. I sometimes feel like the virtual voices weren't heard as much. So this certainly does lend to a more collaborative environment. So with that, how have biotech investments changed as a result of this unprecedented year?
Well, I think that it's interesting that if you have an opportunity to pivot into COVID, everyone talks about tailwinds. And if you can create a lot of tailwinds that are COVID related, investors go crazy. And I think that it's a challenge, however, and it can be a one-trick pony. And I think you have to be very careful as an investor to not just grab onto something that next year you're going to have very difficult comps with. And the way I would approach this is companies that are innovatively pivoting, but they're using it to create a longer term infectious disease platform that they could actually bring the next COVID into it or other infectious diseases, which I think will be around for our lifetime. But I also think that there's a pretty important opportunity to build a beachhead with the lower regulatory barriers that allows you to then bring on menu from other categories. And that's a pretty interesting Trojan horse way for companies in this environment to get a lot of funding and a lot of interest, use that interest for longer term growth opportunities in the way that they invest.
So what should investors be considering as they evaluate their biotech investments? There's just been a lot coming at us this year on the healthcare side.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd keep an eye on is balance sheets. This economy is just such a challenged economy. We put another 100 million on our balance sheet. We think it was important, mainly because you just don't know how the winners are going to win. And when they do win, they're probably going to create a much bigger delta for the losers who probably are going to be cash strapped. So it does probably in the next, I would say, 6 to 9 months, create an M&A opportunity too. So I think you're going to see a lot more inorganic growth as we continue to evolve through this. But I also would go back and say it's important that anyone that they invest in has a longer term strategy for either ID or has ways that they're using this situation to migrate into a more productive, longer term growth opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. The marketing of the concept might be very good, but actually turning it into an actual business is certainly something else. So let's learn more about Quanterix. Where do you fit in the ecosystem?
Well, we have this exquisite capability to see non-invasively in blood disease long before symptoms. And this is a transformative capability. And it's all about how do you commercialize this incredible ability to do this, because you can transform medicine if you can see these diseases long before symptoms, which is a big opportunity for our company. So what we did in this particular COVID situation is we pivoted, but we stayed in neuro, where we have an incredible franchise seeing brain health and blood like no other company in the world, with many biomarkers, whether it be for Alzheimer's, MS, Parkinson's, ALS. Seeing these diseases long before symptoms gives you a much better chance of getting a drug approved and or longer term controlling a disease with a drug. But secondly, we did go into COVID, and we have this ability to see things with such sensitivity that one of the biggest problems today is the asymptomatics. About 40%, I think right now, 48,000 students have been tested positive so far in the United States as they've gone back to school, but only 2 of them have gone to the hospital. Many of them are asymptomatic, but they're carriers. And so the government really is concerned about being able to see this disease without symptoms. And that's where we really come in and play. So we're working on multiple shots on goal and antigen tests that would allow you to do that, hopefully in blood and potentially even saliva, as well as serology, making sure that we know what the adaptive immune system's doing to fight the disease once you actually have had it. And we also look at the innate immune system, the cytokines, trying to predict who it is that's going to go into cytokine storm before it happens, so that doctors have a better chance of saving those individuals. So overall, we're very excited about the way we've deployed ourselves in COVID, as well as with neuro. And there's one category of biomarker that's combination, because people have lost taste and smell and some cognitive function because of COVID. Our NFL, neurofilament light, one of our fastest growing biomarkers, can actually see that in blood. And so this is looking at the longer term effects of COVID is a key area of focus. We have a payer group now that's working with us, one of the largest in the nation, looking at the innate immune system and the fatigue that this virus has created. Is it going to open up a lot of other issues later in life, as well as these neuro function issues? Is that going to create a lot of problems down the road with neurodegeneration? So we're really well positioned with our biomarkers to evolve that overall scenario for the payer groups, as well as the pharma and biotechs.
Yeah, Kevin, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the concern among those of us who don't have, biotech experience and expertise such as yourself, when we're hearing that we don't know how it's going to impact, let's say, the respiratory system, for example. We don't know how vaccinations could hurt someone with a pre-existing condition. And I think as investors and just as people, we're concerned that things might be getting rushed. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But another, amateur question I have for you is, when you test with a blood versus saliva, is it more accurate? Is that why, you go to the blood first?
Yeah, what's interesting, there hasn't been any blood tests approved yet by the FDA, and most of them are nasal tests, and they're trying to harpoon the infection onto the nasal pharyngeal or the nasal swab. And what we're learning is that early, before symptoms appear, you might end up with 80% false negatives, meaning that you do not see the virus. And even though you have it and you're carrying it, you're being told you don't have it. That's a big issue for the really United States right now. So this area of seeing it in blood is a much less invasive test, and it doesn't require PPE gear by those that take it. If you can get it from a dry blood spot with a home care sample, it creates a bigger opportunity. So right now we're seeing great data of being able to identify it. Saliva will be the next round of our pursuits. And we have a lot of R&D folks around the world in our PPH, our Powering Precision Health ecosystem, that are deploying our technologies very rapidly, trying to research out better ways to see the disease before symptoms, or really right after the symptoms start, so that we can improve the false positive, false negative issue that is currently out there with many of these tests.
Well, I also think what you're doing on the neuro side of the business is really interesting, to be able to catch diseases like an Alzheimer's. If you can get it earlier, it just improves medicine. It certainly lowers cost for providers and for patients themselves. And the medicine can just only be improved upon if you're able to catch these earlier, so we can understand these diseases better.
It's really interesting. We have a two-pronged attack with our Powering Precision Health vision. The first is getting drugs approved by getting cohorts of patients that don't have the symptoms yet, when it's easier for a drug to be effective, and also to do it at a lower dose, which lowers its toxicity. And that's why using our biomarkers is allowing these neuro drugs to come through with a much higher probability of getting approved. There's never been an Alzheimer's drug approved, however, So that's the other major category is secondarily, once you do get a drug approved, then you're going to want to know, and we've now got evidence, we can see Alzheimer's disease cascade as much as 10 to 20 years before dementia. And so many of the drug makers today are utilizing that capability to get these earlier cohorts to improve the potential for getting a good drug. But once we have that drug, we're going to move to stage 2, which is the prevention of the disease, using biomarkers to understand how you live your life. If you have a lot of concussions, if you're playing soccer or sports and you have a lot of concussions, what's that doing to the long-term prospect for Alzheimer's or for MS? We have a lot of correlative understanding that that's an environmental factor that can increase the probability that you get these diseases. Same thing with eating growth hormones or antibiotics in the food chain, or all the sugars and the addictions that we have for obesity. There's a lot of evidence, even with radiation from x-rays and from CAT scans, that these things can have a lot of deleterious effects on the body. So biomarkers can start to teach us where we're hurting our bodies long before they hurt our bodies. And that's the long-term vision, is initially get the drugs to help those that have the disease and see the disease early. And then secondarily, let's go for prevention and live our life and be empowered as individuals to know our biomarker profiles.
Wow, fascinating. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
It's our pleasure, Jill. Thank you.
You got it. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.